When I was working in South America, in Colombia, once in a while, interesting things would happen. And so one day, we get a visit from a priest who has a letter from his bishop saying that this priest of his diocese very much wanted to become part of a religious community rather than just be a diocesan priest. And that he was very much interested in joining a community that was dedicated to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So, we were all sort of wondering about this, but it was kind of an exciting thing to happen. And so we, my superior got in touch with this priest and set up a time for him to come and visit us. Well, we happened to have been at a diocesan function, a number of us, and the superior happened to mention to one of the assisting bishops of the Archdiocese of Bogota that we had heard from this one diocese, and that this priest had contacted us with a letter from his bishop. And he told him the priest's name. And the bishop said, "What was his name again?" So he showed him the letter. And he said, him. Well, he's not really a priest. In fact, he's been arrested any number of times for impersonating a priest, and even has impersonated a bishop. And what this guy usually would do was, because he had at one time been in the seminary, he knew how to do everything. And he actually wasn't a bad preacher, as it turned out, from one of the people that he had ripped off. And he was notorious for showing up at particularly busy times of the year and offering to be of help. And then once he sort of ingratiated himself, he would find out how to take the collection and anything that was worth it, and then he'd disappear. And so our superior at the time was one who was into dramatic kinds of stuff, so he says, "Let's set up a sting operation for this guy." And we had to get in touch with the Colombian version of the FBI in order to pull this thing off. Why I'm telling you this will eventually become clear, but what ended up happening was the priest came, and we had an FBI agent that was posing as a seminarian. It's actually called DAS in Colombia. So we had a DAS agent there posing as a seminarian, and so this priest man shows up, and we show him where his room's going to be. And then we have arranged that at a certain time we were going to call the parish, which was several blocks away, where he was going to celebrate and preach the next day. And so we had it all set up. And in the meantime, when we were leaving, this seminarian was going to call the DAS, and they were going to stop us on the way. Well, we get about a block away from the seminary residence on our way walking over to the church, and all of a sudden, this huge, big, black SUV stops, and all of these people jump out with automatic weapons. And there's the phony priest, and then two of us, and we're all pointing at him. We're going to shoot that guy, please. And he said, "How did you figure it out? How did you figure it out?" And so we told him, we had connections. So, he was shocked that, we not only, found him out, but that we actually got this big demonstration of force to prove the point. And they took him away in handcuffs. And we sort of shakily went back and had some coffee or something. Has to do with identity, basically. This man was an expert at passing himself off as a priest. He even got away with passing himself off in the country of Ecuador as a missionary bishop. He knew the right words. He knew what to do. He knew just enough to convince the trusting people, clergy and laity alike, that he was the real deal. He had all kinds of documents with him. But he was a phony, and he was a thief. And so finally, we at least threw this roadblock in his way, but we don't know if, how many more people he went to rip off than after he got out of jail. He may have lived the rest of his life. He may still be alive for all I know, even though this is more than 30 years ago. Because he was able to talk the talk and able to prove certain things. But he wasn't for real. So, anything that he had done, as far as sacramental acts were concerned, were not, valid. And all of that stuff. Jesus asks the question in the gospel today, who do people say that I am? So he gets the variety of answers. Elijah, or one of the prophets. He said, but who do you say that I am? Of course, Peter blurts it out. You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And, of course, Peter, being the impetuous one that he was, thought he understood what the kind of Messiah that Jesus was. And that's why he calls him that. And so Jesus, gives him this particular responsibility and a blessing. But even with that, Peter really doesn't know who Jesus is yet. He thinks he does. And it only is later that he comes to understand the kind of Messiah that Jesus is. It was easy to use the word because they had the understanding of what a Messiah was supposed to be. A great leader, one who was going to drive out the Romans, one who was going to make the people great again, one that was going to emerge as that great leader and powerful one who would make everything to be the way that God wanted it to be and had meant it to be until all of these enemies had messed up the lives of God's people. But beyond where we read today, Peter, as we'll hear actually in next Sunday's Gospel, challenges Jesus when Jesus goes into the long explanation of what kind of Messiah he really is and what's going to happen to him. Now, at the end of the Gospel today, Jesus does one of those things that always makes us wonder, okay, now he's the Messiah, but don't tell anybody. Keep it to yourselves. And it's precisely because he knew that if they said he was the Messiah, they were going to jump to the same conclusions about his identity and what he ought to be doing that Peter really was, and that the other apostles were already doing, even though they weren't saying it. Just because he affirmed the word, they thought, now we got the guy, and now we're going to hang with him because this is going to be the one who's going to deliver us, who's going to do all of these things for us. Jesus didn't want anybody chasing after him, becoming one of his followers, because they thought that he was going to be this great military and political leader that was going to, drive out the Romans. That he didn't want them following him, as he says in other places in the Gospels, because he could give them a free lunch by multiplying loaves and fishes. or by seeing miracles, other miracles take place. What people who were lame walking, and the blind seeing, and the deaf hearing, and the dumb speaking, and people with demons having them cast out. Seeing him do all of these things and say, boy, let's stay around with him because he can really do these things. And besides, it's entertaining to see all these things happen. Jesus didn't want hangers-on. He didn't want followers who were there because of what they could get out of it. He wanted people who would put stock in his word and in the ultimate actions of him being a Messiah. The Messiah who was going to be handed over to evil men and be tried and crucified and then rise on the third day. That's the kind of Messiah Jesus was going to be. That was the kind of Messiah that God had intended for him to be, to deliver them from the power, not necessarily just of their enemies, but from the power of the ultimate enemies of sin and suffering and death. That was going to be the Messiahship of Jesus. And if they wanted to follow that Messiah, then they had to be willing to walk the same way that Jesus was going. And they had to be willing to carry the cross. And they had to even be willing to give up their lives for his sake if they wanted to follow him. That's why Jesus spends so much time telling them not to tell anybody about this. Or why he takes Peter to task when Peter starts to argue with him. Oh no, this can't be this way with you. Because he wants the truth about his identity known. But he wants that truth to sink in. For them to take their time and taking it in and taking everything into account. And as he says elsewhere, to calculate the cost before you commit yourself to this task. Because it will be costly. Today, the cost of being a disciple of Jesus is beginning to increase because as our country becomes less and less supportive of Christianity or of religion in general, as the Western world becomes more and more secular, and as we have more and more stuff thrown at us through the media and the climate that we live in, the acrimony that continues just in this country, emanating from the political world, but affecting us in all kinds of ways. We have to continuously ask ourselves the question, why am I doing this in the first place? Why am I a Christian? Who do I say that I am with respect to God? Can I say that I'm really a disciple, which means that I'm continuing to learn about who Jesus is and what it matters that I believe in him? Or am I just a fan of Jesus? I root for Jesus, but I'm not going to, stick my neck out beyond reason. Should that be demanded of me? Because I know enough. I keep paying my dues and making my installments on my insurance so that at the end of the line, I have claim on a place with God. And it's not that the Lord dislikes people who do that, but that means that we're missing part of the intensity of relationship that ought to be present from those who claim to be disciples, those who are continuing to be taught, continuing to learn. of who Jesus is and what it means for me to say, you are my Messiah, the Son of the living God. You know, the Hebrew people had to come to the awareness eventually of who they were. Because in those 400 years that they were in Egypt and that they had gone from being Joseph's kin to becoming enslaved, they had begun to forget who they were. And that's one of the reasons why when Moses emerges as a leader, they're not so sure about this guy. And he certainly isn't certain about his role. He tries to beg off as the story develops. But yet God wanted him to understand who he was and who God wanted him to be for this people so that they could remember that they were really God's people. And that who God was for them was their deliverer, the one who had gathered them, the one who had made them especially his own, who had promised them all kinds of things, who had already given them a land and wanted to give it back to them. If they would but follow him and do what he asked them to do and be the way he wanted them to be so they could play their role in God's ultimate plan that now includes you and me. But they had to rediscover who they were. And it took a long, long, long time. And we who are disciples of Jesus today, we have to continue to discover who we are and whose we are. Now, why it is we do what we do, believe what we believe. It's not enough for us to just present an appearance or going through the motions or being like Hector, the phony priest in the beginning of my homily today, who knew all the right things to say and all of the right things to do, but didn't have what it really meant to be a priest, a bishop, a servant of Christ, who just was in it for what he could get out of it and fooling people. Ultimately, we may fool other people that we are really dedicated Christians, that we're really, truly great disciples of Jesus because we come to church, we belong to the parish, we do this, we do that. But ultimately, the Lord is the one who looks at us and says to me, to you, who do you say that I am? And if we answer like Peter, then how is our life going to be any different than it is right now? What kind of words are going to come out of our mouths day in and day out towards others, in situations, expressing ourselves? What kind of values are we going to continue to present to others, or will we present to others? If we say to Jesus that you are my Messiah, you are my deliverer, you are my Lord, what difference is it going to make how we answer that question? Jesus' answer about himself is consistent. And once again, in that constancy of his being, he comes to you and to me today. Once again, through his word and in the sacrament of the altar, so that we can grow more into likeness with him and be able to answer with greater integrity the question that he puts to us. And I really encourage you all, at some point today, take some time in quiet and reread this gospel. And when Jesus asks the question, remember that he's asking you specifically. And how will you answer? Not just how you think you should answer, but how would you answer if he was putting it immediately to you face to face? And then what difference is it going to make?